Ryan. We're so glad you could join us this afternoon, and I won't offer an elaborate introduction. I'll let you do that yourself. But again, thanks to you and to the BRT team for offering a presentation to Fish and Wildlife Service folks today. And friends.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for everybody being here, and thanks to Aaron and Liana and folks for the invite. And yeah, I'll echo what has been said a lot. It's been great to see a lot of people that I haven't seen in a long time, partly due to COVID. I also relocated out of the state to Northeastern Oregon. My wife was a professor at University of Alaska Anchorage, and we switched down here. Anyway, but I'm still, I work as my official title is the Science Applications Coordinator for the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center with Jeremy and Steve Gray. We're part of USGS and the Department of Interior. And just to give you, I guess, a little bit of background, I'm a hydrologist by training, and I do a little bit of coordination work, and then I'm also very much a kind of a wannabe social scientist as well. And so I moved up to Alaska maybe about 11 years ago, and we lived there for pretty much that whole time. And I started working with the Yukon River and Tribal Watershed Council and was their science director for a number of years, and then switched over to USGS and have been there ever since. And maybe I'll share my screen here. We'll get going on the presentation. Oh, wait. All right. And so as you can see from this slide, I'm going to be talking about a project today that was actually funded by the Bureau of Indian Affairs through their Tribal Resilience program, as well as the Alaska CASC did a bunch of in-kind kind of donation. And one of the most important things is from this slide is that I'm a very small part of a very large team. Linda Chase is our tribal liaison at the Alaska CASC, or the Climate Adaptation Science Center. She and I kind of came up with the original idea for the project, and we had been wanting to work together, and I have done a lot of kind of participatory research throughout my years, through my PhD, and then when we moved up into Alaska, a lot of that's been with tribal communities. And so for me, I don't know, I kind of feel like each project is kind of an evolution of what worked well in the last project, and what did not, and then what I kind of wanted to do. And Jeremy Littell also joined our team very early and became a very essential part of that. Nathan Kettle is up at University of Alaska Fairbanks with ACAP, the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment Policy. And then we have our Krista Haringa has joined the CASC to help with tribal engagement, and Melinda, and then Molly and Mike are our communication staffs. But the most important part of this project team were a lot of the community partners and team members we worked with. And so they are all listed there. There was a lot of them, and many more involved in the project. And I'll kind of talk about their involvement and how they directed the project and what we ended up going on to do with them. And basically what chose to kind of focus on today is some of the data that we got from the project, some of the data that we kind of made for the project or put together, and then how we kind of engaged with these communities and what were some of the successes and challenges with that. And yeah, again, so we're talking a little bit about how this plays into some of the planning efforts at the community level with Alaska Native or rural communities. Again, how we can combine some of their community knowledge and their local indigenous knowledge with kind of the latest and greatest climate science that's out there, and some of the tools that have been developed by some of our university partners. And then finally, one of the keys of, and this is very much kind of a co-production framework, and I think this is going to become kind of part of that co-production framework. But Nathan Kettle provided an evaluation of the product by the participants kind of throughout the project. And so as kind of the leads of what we were going to do with this project and what we were going to develop, we had a lot of opportunities for the participants to kind of say, hey, this was great, this part was great, that part was not so great. I was falling asleep after lunch and all those kind of things. So we'll talk about that. And to kind of set up the context here, you know, for these communities, adaptation planning, you know, the slide says it well, and a lot of these slides are actually from Melinda Chase and Jeremy and all these guys. But adaptation planning at the community level can be really overwhelming because there's a lot of things going on, and frankly, climate is just one of those things, right? They can be dealing with all different demands on their time and turnover, getting, you know, the communities engaged, you know, documenting knowledge within the community. And there's a certain kind of base level of adaptation that is going on within the community, right? And so people are figuring out ways to, you know, dry their fish in the kind of warmer, wetter, hotter summers, and the bugs that come with that. They're trying to figure out what to do with the houses in their communities that are being, you know, threatened by either riverine or coastal erosion, and moving them one at a time or 10 at a time. And so they're obviously, I think this group has a good idea of what's going on out in the villages, and we'll talk a little bit more about that more. And so to try to, you know, think forward and not dealing with the immediate issues can be a bit of a stretch at points. And you know, in Alaskan tribal communities, adaptation to climate change is happening in this kind of dynamic context of an indigenous worldview, where their livelihood and culture and ongoing, you know, extractive development, colonization, active innovation, like I was just talking about, and revitalization efforts to, you know, help with the community. The complex governments, you have these, you know, what most people would refer to as small villages, but there's oftentimes 3 or 4 different governance systems within a village that are all doing different things and interacting with each other. And so it's a really big challenge. And Alaska Natives obviously have been adapting for millennia in these environments. Alaska in general is an active landscape, right? That goes through a lot of changes, but with climate change, we're seeing a lot of you know, challenges brought on by just how rapidly it's happening here. And so that's definitely unique and not necessarily new to Alaska, but ongoing. And so we were lucky enough to partner with the 5 communities on this slide right here: Kotlik, St. Michael, Kwagilungak, Quinnahuck, and Iliamna. And it was great. We had a little bit of trouble getting outreach. We were originally hoping for some interior communities and some coastal communities, and then going to kind of look at the comparisons and the challenges between those 2 different sets of communities, 2 different kind of types of communities. But we ended up doing an application process and really relying on some of the tribal organizations, such as Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and some other organizations, to kind of get the word out that we had this project and that we were looking to work with communities. And so we had an application process, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, but going back to those, you know, multiple levels of governance in a village, you know, and this is kind of one thing that I learned throughout my experience in Alaska villages. When I would you know, partner with communities or villages, I would often just be partnering with one person oftentimes, and then we, really heavily rely kind of on that person to introduce us to the rest of the community and make connections there. And so Melinda she's the lands manager for her tribe. She's from Anvik. And so, she was very familiar with these multiple layers of governance and was, came up with a great idea. Well, let's try to get multiple, people from the corporation, from the tribal government, from the city government, all as part of one team, so we can kind of talk to them together and understand what's going on in the community, and how it's responding to climate change. And so the team was kind of self-selected by the community. They applied, and then we kind of selected the applications. We had a limited amount of funding, and so we kind of narrowed it down to these 5 communities that had kind of done the most with terms of community planning around climate change and those things, and we were off. And as you can tell from the project title, and we kind of leaned on that project title pretty heavily throughout the project, looking forward, Jeremy was essential in helping kind of corral the SNAP data and get it into workable. And I'll show you some examples of that. But really, like, talking about what's going on in those projections with the communities, and what they thought that was going to mean for their community, and how it might impact some of their activities and infrastructure and those types of things. Looking back, it was this was probably my, I guess, well, anyway, we all worked on things together, but I'm very interested in kind of participatory methodologies. And so we had developed a couple different exercises that I'll get into here, but really trying to get an understanding from the community about the changes that they've experienced over their lifetime. And so, we were obviously talking to a wide variety of ages. And so we got, up to, 1 decade to, several decades of information about the changes they'd experienced and what that meant for, weather and infrastructure and climate in general, and a lot of different things. And then one of the other key parts of it was trying to build capacity in these communities and exposing them to some of the adaptation tools that exist out there. And so we worked with SNAP from UAF, the scenarios for networks for Arctic and Alaska planning, I believe. And they've developed a lot of really great tools that can be used at the community level, and you can get a lot of really interesting information from those tools. And actually, before we go there, so the way we always frame this project is that we really wanted to, build capacity in the communities. We really wanted to help them document their knowledge so that it could be used, and then expose them to these projections, again, so they could use these things for, public comments, for other grants, and for community plans, actual community plans too. And so we'll show you how we worked on that with them. This diagram over here is kind of a schematic of the project as a whole. And so we started off with a training in Fairbanks. Then we had a webinar kind of series that people would call into, and we did different presentations. And this is, this is kind of a little bit of an older diagram. Then we had, Jeremy, Melinda, and I went out to each one of these communities and spent 2 to 3 days in each one, and had, again, a bunch of different community events and meetings to talk with people. And then we had kind of another wrap-up training in Fairbanks. And then we had multiple opportunities for the communities to again, get together and kind of validate and, look over the community data that we collected and make sure that they were comfortable with it, and that it's something that they wanted to share and all that. And so it's been pretty exciting that this whole project took about, I guess, a little over 2 years. And we have finally kind of finished a lot of the community reports. And by finished, I mean going through all the different reviews. And then now we're starting to switch gears and think about some publications that might result from this. But once again, in terms of engaging with these communities, and Melinda was really great about, explaining this and just kind of insisting on us kind of keep coming back to this way of thinking and the way of engagement, but really trying to have this holistic framing, right? And so relating climate impacts from the local to the global scale, looking at what kind of adaptation actions are currently being taken and what might be taken. And this is kind of a nice diagram in the center here that talks about, there's the individual, and then they're part of a community, which is part of a region, state, the Arctic, and the global. And so, each one of those has a different level of impacts. And there's different ways to contribute to the adaptation action because of that, right? And again, kind of a key part of our project design was these community visits where we went out and spent a couple days in each one of the communities, met lots of people, talked again to people from the city, people from the corporation, people from the tribal government. We did activities at the school. And, it's really great. Sometimes, there's too much going on and people are, don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking to people from the outside. But we got really lucky with this community. We were really great. The other kind of key component of our engagement was the free, prior, and informed consent. So, everybody that we met with, we had forms that kind of explain the project and explain what we were trying to do, and said, that even though we're the federal government, you don't have to talk to us, and all those kind of things. And so that's again just a really important piece of engagement to get out there and realize, make sure people know they don't have to share anything that they don't want to share with you, and all those types of things. And then finally, really making the extra effort and getting the community to review the data or the information that you collect from the community, making sure they're okay with sharing it or not, and making sure that the notes you took and what you wrote down sounded right and sounded good and was said by people. This is a great slide from Jeremy, and just again, focuses on the just the rate of climate change that's happening in, or more appropriately, temperature change that's happening throughout the state of Alaska. And these are our climate divisions in the state. And so you can see it's a little bit heterogeneous, but all of it kind of, a lot of it hovers right around that 2 times the global rate. But as he says there, some parts are Alaska, and for this project, again, we were focusing kind of on the Western Alaska LCC range. So most of our villages were in the YK Delta, and then we had Iliamna over here that participated as well. And this is an example of one of the participatory exercises we did. And so we printed out, big maps of the area and asked people to kind of identify their area of interest, so their traditional use area. And so we got a lot of these amazing hand-drawn maps with, where they did certain things, where they did certain activities, places they go. This is Kotlik right here. Kotlik is right around here, and St. Michael is right up here. And then we essentially kind of digitized these maps into a footprint, and that footprint was what Jeremy then used to, again, kind of corral the climate data available through the IAM model and that. And so on the left here are all the kind of traditional use areas that were identified. So again, these are the footprints that were derived from those beautiful maps that were created at the community during the community visits. And then Jeremy was able to take those footprints and essentially summarize the climate information for the area, so that it became very poignant and very of interest to the folks in that place. And then he was able to talk about how that projections and scenarios and how those all different. And so this is a change in the temperature projection, and it's the temperature change relative to 1970 to 1999. So that was an era that was very much of relevance to the community and the people that we were talking to. And so we got those traditional use areas, and then we also had community meetings and asked people about different changes that they had seen through their lifetime. And what the data that I'm going to present here, just for simplicity's sake, is from Kotlik, which is again in kind of the northern part of the Yukon Delta. And yeah, again, we just got a lot of great information from the community members. There's a lot of concern with ice travel, especially in the fall, shoulder seasons, the fall and the spring. The ice was not as thick. We used to go to St. Michael and Stebbins on the ocean ice, and now we use land routes. And so one of the neat things that came out of this project is that, we can see what, Jeremy's information is telling us about some of the projected changes. And that's really interesting. And as scientists and Western folks, there's a certain, we're interested in those numbers and how those changes occur. But when you pair those numbers with some of these, observations, I mean, it just paints the picture much more easily. So it's great for science communication. It's great to communicate the impacts that these communities are having and dealing with and trying to adapt to. Again, just travel is a big part of some of the changing conditions that people are dealing with, and unfortunately, a lot of these communities lose folks by open water in springtime. They're going along on their snow machine, and they fall in, and so that's a big area of concern. They also do a lot of subsistence fishing during the winter time as well, and that has it. This is talking about this is a map from Neil Pastic. About the current probability of permafrost over here. And so you can see it's a fairly, we're in the discontinuous zone of permafrost here. And it's very much changing. And when we look at the ground temperatures, which is essentially, how permafrost is defined, right? It's defined by 2 years of ground temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. We see there's some big changes expected for this area. And I have actually, with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council and some other folks at USGS, we've been looking at active layer declines, specifically in Kotlik, for the last 10 years now. And it's very dramatic of what's going on there in that 10-year period. The active layer is deepening quite a bit. And so we talked to, again, people in the communities where they're telling us, well, I have to jack up my house 4 times a year now. The buildings are shaking from airplanes and vehicles. The ground is sinking. In Kotlik, we saw all this heavy equipment that was, not all of this, but some heavy equipment that was just sinking into the tundra behind the school, and is, therefore it's not, you can't use it anymore. And so there's lots of changes, lots of erosion, both riverine and coastal in these communities. And, it's important for these communities to document that, and then they can use that information, again, in kind of grant applications and public comments and community planning in general. And it's a really nice pairing of, that local community knowledge and the Western science knowledge. This is a subsistence calendar we did with each of these communities. We did a current and a past, and talking about how subsistence activities have changed over time, what seasons they're in, and so if those if those activities are taking place again in the shoulder seasons, there's a vulnerability associated with that, and even in the wintertime now there can be vulnerability associated with that. And again, just getting a lot of great information about, fish runs and the summer chums and the kings and how they all usually come in and how that's changed. you know, water temps being really high and having fish kills, all about plants, you know, blooming in November because it got warm, and then, you know, they died shortly after that. You know, difference in subsistent resources. So the fish had pus and more parasites. So again, a lot of, you know, really great information there. And so the idea again is to pair this local and indigenous knowledge with climate science to, you know, be able to make effective public comments or grant applications or community planning, you know, documenting those impacts related to changing climate for communities and decision makers. As I mentioned, improving science communication, really, you know, painting a picture of what those parameters, the change in parameters look like, right? You know, what does 3 degrees Celsius look like, and how is that impacting these communities? Oh, it's impacting their infrastructure because it's sinking into the ground, or they're having trouble with flooding now because the you know, the ocean isn't frozen over anymore. They're having more trouble with flooding. And then finally, you know, you can really, if you are systematic about it, you can use that knowledge to validate some of the climate science products, remote sensing and modeling. And as we'll try to run through these last couple of slides, but as I mentioned, we had an evaluation process that kind of took place throughout the project that Nathan Kettle spearheaded, and he asked all the folks in this picture, besides Jeremy, I'll tell them, Linda and I. And so again, people were really excited to have multiple levels of governance involved in the planning and the education essentially that we provided. You know, a lot of these communities were really excited to have people like Jeremy come out and talk about, you know, what has gone on in the last several decades and what the scientists think is going to happen. And they're really interested in interacting with that and told him if they thought he was right or not, and all those kind of good things. Again, Jeremy's a great communicator, and he can put that information in that holistic framing. And so it was neat to see those discussions and to take notes during them. A lot of information come out. You know, to again have the Western science, you know, again, these folks, you know, they know what's happening there and they're trying to deal with it. To see the Western science kind of, you know, back up what they've observed and what they're dealing with. A lot of the participants were really pretty stoked on that and seeing that pairing of the knowledges put together. And then, you know, another part that we learned a lot is we actually focused on colonization and trauma within these communities. And we had some Alaska Native faculty from UAF present on that, Lauren Dementieff, and some other folks that just spoke to those issues and just the acknowledgement of that. And I think it really went a long way. I think it was very important for some of our participants to hear about that and to know that we're cognizant of those types of things and the history of what's happened between our nations. And so I think the acknowledgement of that was really helpful. And we also had ILOCA, the Exchange for Local Observations of Knowledge in Arctic, that presented some really neat community atlases. Katie Spellman in this picture here from UAF is a just wonderful research scientist and educator. And then again, we worked with the computer work on the variety of tools. We have these, and I think if we can't share them right now, we can share them very soon. This is just the table of contents of some of the trainings that we did do. We made these very nice reports with our communications folks, which were other kind of essential team partners in getting this information out and designing it so it could be interactive and engaging with the tribal participants. This is the training 2. Again, it was quite the, just we talked about a lot of different things and tried to hit it in different ways and new ways. And I think it was, based on the evaluation, it was received very, very well. So that was really exciting to see. Although we did have, times where we redirected according to what, you know, people wanted to learn more about and those types of things. And then at the end, each community, not only did they receive kind of reports of the trainings, so they could go back and rehash some of that material, but they also got our community report. And so we were kind of looking at, you know, clips of that report with the Indigenous knowledge, and then some of the climate products that, again, Jeremy had put together for them. And so it was really exciting that, you know, part of our work has made some additions to COTLIC. Was already working on a tribal resilience assessment. And so some of this that we did on this project is now within that assessment. So that was really exciting to see. We had some of the other communities write grant applications based on some of the work that we did with them. It's in general going into community planning. And then, as I mentioned, you know, as kind of researchers, we're thinking about some of the journal articles that might come out of this. And there's a great, I'm going to say, a movement of Alaska Native folks here, and really there's a lot of effort in making sure that they are part of the process, the research process, and have a say in how things go. And so we think that this project, while it was definitely, you know, not perfect in any way, has a lot of great things to share with folks, both about the information that we learned from the communities, but also about how we kind of interacted with the communities. And that this project has evolved. Melinda Chase has kind of, again, taken a lot of the lessons learned from this project and the ideas that were kind of generated, and is working now with Krista Haringa and to a lesser extent Jeremy and I and some other folks for this Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. And so they have basically this whole structure that is going to have a number of different information sessions and learning sessions. And then you can get one-on-one coaching for grant development, learning network calls. So we'll have different people talking about different things. And what we're really hoping to do is also kind of increase that two-way communication, you know, from the communities back to the CASC and other, you know, agencies and researchers. We really want to you know, try to figure out some of the biggest needs from the communities that they're dealing with, and start to think about how we might be able to help with some of that. So I hope that wasn't too long, but as I mentioned, the BIA funded this project, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I think, I don't know if Jeremy's still on the phone, but if he is, he can obviously speak quite a bit to this project as well.
I'm still here. Nice job.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And we do still have some minutes here. Folks have questions? Is anyone seeing me or hearing me?
I can see you.
Oh, good.
Okay. Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, good. My computer's being really weird. Like it's not loading. I don't understand how this is even working. Sorry, any questions for Ryan, folks, based on what you saw, or comments or thoughts? Actually, Ryan, maybe if you unshare your screen there, we can get the constellation of folks back up on the...
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that.
I can see everybody again.
Yeah, I remember, I think maybe Siho and somebody else. It's great to, you know, have you here as part of that, because we, again, Molly Tankersley and Mike DeLue are our communications folks for the CASC and IARC, which is the International Arctic Research Center at UAF. And I can't talk enough about, I mean, gosh, they just put in a ton of work on this project, and, you know, making things look good, and thinking about, you know, how to communicate the science, you know, for any kind of engagement work, whether it be tribal or just stakeholders in general. I think it's really important to have those those folks along in the process. And so now, you know, they're a part of almost every meeting and always kind of looking for opportunities to, you know, develop new things to communicate about.
Gotcha. Amy, go ahead. You have the floor.
Hey, thanks. I'll put my hand down after this. Hey, Ryan, you know, you mentioned something that piques my interest and something we've been dealing with. You mentioned the using the information to help the communities apply for grants. And one of the big things that we've been wrestling with was, how do you get from here to there in the whole process of, it seemed like this catch-22 of, I need to get a grant so I can do something to help my community, but I can't get that grant because I don't have this information. I know there's a big project from ANTHC that's trying to address this, but I'm curious if you and Jeremy and anybody else had thoughts on what you think the sweet spot is in terms of the climate research that needs to go along. How much, where's the sweet spot for investing and helping the communities such that they can put those towards those plans and those grants?
Awesome. I think it's a great question, Amy. I'm going to see, Jeremy, do you want to?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, although I'm reluctant to think I'm going to tell Amy anything new here. I think, Amy, that it's a great question. And I think, you know, ANTHC is especially working hard on realignment of some of those issues with funding agencies, including NSF, and trying to figure out, you know, who all the players are here so that the very limited amount of money relative to the size of the problem that is out there in play can be more efficient. They're also trying to call and lobby for increased funding, which we, of course, can't do on the federal side of things without causing problems. I think, though, you pointed specifically at the climate research. And to the extent that the risks in the communities and that they're specifically facing are driven in part by some of the climate changes and the impacts on both physical systems and things more directly relevant to people, I think there are some sweet spots for funding the actual risk impacts on communities. And who should do that? I think, personally, I think that, you know, navigating the new Arctic looks like that, should look more like that with some of the experiences that Ryan's described that we had in this kind of project. I think a lot of those programs fall short in part because they can't operate well in Alaska for reasons that program managers that aren't here and don't have experience here just wouldn't understand without learning it the hard way, which they're doing. And so I think that there's a relatively small amount of primed research on things like combinations of erosion, sea level rise, storm impacts, those kinds of things that could be done in a risk management setting with an eye towards both in indigenous knowledge and multiple knowledge approaches that could yield some really big benefits. But I think that it requires enough incentive for the academic and federal researchers who have that capacity to focus their efforts chiefly on that. And I'm not sure how we create that environment. So that's a long-winded answer. There's a lot of different pieces in there. The climate projections were relatively easy because it's my job to do it. It's something that one or two people can do a lot of work on. I also don't think those are the most relevant needed pieces of science, though, when it comes to the risks that the communities face. So.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks a lot.
And I'll just add to that quickly, Amy, you know, this Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network that, you know, Melinda and Krista are kind of spearheading, I think is another way to go to that. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we saw a lot in this project was that, and, you know, just in terms of working with rural communities over the past 10 years, you know, they get really interested when they see other communities doing things, and it's you know, I don't know if it's easier, but there's definitely a lot of interest in you know, talking community to community. You know, I think at places like Alaska Forum on the Environment and even AdCom to a certain extent, you know, again, you have a lot of agency or researchers kind of giving those presentations. And again, I think that's needed and there's a place for that. But, really trying to have this, cross-community learning was a really powerful tool. And I think developing some of those things.
Yeah. So I actually have a question, and maybe it's more for sort of like the Fish and Wildlife Service folks here on the TV screen. I was just sort of curious, well, maybe I should preface it a little bit. Like one of the things that, we're interested in within Northern Latitudes is like how to integrate communities into the other types of planning processes that agencies have going on. So, so refuges, for example, your comprehensive conservation plans, like could there be more innovative ways, kind of like what Ryan showed here, that you could see informing the planning efforts of your various programs? So like turning the question on the audience, I guess, if y'all don't mind, if anybody has thoughts.
Hey, Aaron, not really my lane on this issue entirely, but I would say that my big thinking about that is what Ryan did, what USGS did. I think it seemed I don't want to say it's a one-off event, but it was tied to that BIA funding. And I think what you're talking about, Aaron, is systemic equity changes that are needed. That's a bigger, broader, long-term, ongoing. In talking about these issues with people I respect, who I think understand it, it's a bit of a burden, but the burden is on us, right? It's the government and the agencies who are required to have definitions and fit within certain parameters and understand exactly what we're doing and make a sort of trustworthy use of money. For the tribes, for the Alaska Native communities, I don't know that that's the best approach. Some people that I've talked to, like Henry Huntington and others, say, just roll up your sleeves and get started. And unfortunately, in the government, fortunately for some reasons, unfortunately for many reasons, we can't do that without having that structure and those definitions. And that's the circle that we're caught in, this kind of, just uncertainty about, all right, how do we start? Maybe it is rolling up our sleeves, but we can't do it without crossing this barrier. What are the definitions? What is co-production knowledge? What is indigenous knowledge? What is prior and informed consents? We have to fit it into that legal rubric, that colonist approach, or whatever, I don't know what terminology people have used. Yeah, so just some thoughts.
Hey, Aaron, this is Charlene. It's also out of my lane, but it is a topic that is of great interest to the group I've been working with in our Anthropocene effort. And one of the topics that, really has risen to the top is the need to really rethink, our collaborative sort of approaches and seek greater power sharing, or shared decision making, different, maybe some alternative environmental governance models that bring greater equality to conservation efforts. So I'd say the short answer to your question is yes. Yes, there are ways to do it. I don't know what those ways are. I don't know what the answers are, but one of the things that I'm kind of hoping that we'll be able to start doing is identifying opportunities to pilot some alternative ways of collaborating and working towards collective solutions, and start small and see what we can figure out, what works and what doesn't, and start scaling up from there.
Yeah, and I think, even, obviously what you're saying, Gil, that it is this broad systemic change that is needed, but on the road to that, I do think, as Ryan shared, some of these kind of like, one projects or one-offs, they do stimulate a bunch of cascading, sort of positive effects. So yeah, a pilot or something like what you were saying, Charla, would be kind of intriguing to think about for refuge planning or other programmatic planning. We are at a little past the 2 o'clock hour, but I just want to let folks know I did throw Ryan's email address in the chat too, if you want to follow up with him anything individually. But if there's any last questions, or Ryan, any last points you care to share with the crew?
Yeah, all good. I mean, it's complicated work, and I think there's a lot of good thought to thinking about how to make it more sustainable and how to make it more participatory and collaborative, and and I do think that there's at least into the short-term future, there's kind of a rising tide of Alaska Native voices that are getting paired with researchers.
Yeah.
And so I think those communities are going to have a lot more information available to them in the future, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do know just from some of the tribes that we've worked with that saw you and Melinda present this at Alaska Conference of Tribal Environmental Management last fall, they came back saying, hey, how do we get a BRT project?
Yeah.
Building Resilience Today project. So I definitely think you guys have created something that there's demand for with this one. So
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, well, and that, I mean, a big part of that Tribal Resilience Learning Network is basically looking at that, the tribal resilience funding from the BIA and how you can use it and what you can do for different things. And so, so hopefully that's at least one way where, well, this was, perhaps a one-off with these communities, different parts of it continue to kind of live on and evolve into new things.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again, Ryan. And then just a reminder to folks, April 13th, hopefully it's on your calendar already, but the next kind of Northern Latitudes check-in. I think we might end up focusing that one on some sort of project updates. There are basically a half dozen projects that we're working on collaboratively with a bunch of Fish and Wildlife Service folks, and we've made some good progress in the last, I don't know, few months or so. So we'll probably focus on sharing some of that. Anybody want the last word? Okay. Thanks, friends.
Thanks,
Enjoy the beautiful spring weather.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Thanks, Ryan.